Thank you so much for your gracious welcome to Memphis. It's my first time here, my first time actually ever in Tennessee. And you have a beautiful city, a spectacular museum. I thoroughly enjoyed my visit. And I would like to bring my children back here actually to see your museum. I think that's important. Thank you to Liscombe Pitts. Thank you very much to the Breakfast Club and to AutoZone for hosting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. And I speak to you here today as a lawyer and a bioethicist, and as somebody who's worked with diverse groups of stakeholders at trying to have conversations on contested and controversial issues. So although my examples today are going to be about science and biotechnology, my message today is equally relevant to the areas in which you work: education, not-for-profit, policy, and big business, government, whatever your area is. All of you have messages that you need to communicate for success in your enterprise and to accomplish your missions both as individuals and as business people. And many of you will appreciate how very difficult it is to get your message across clearly and to have it heard, let alone accepted, by your various publics. So what I'm going to do today is help you understand how your publics perceive and receive your messages and how you can then engage your publics with your message. So you will be aware that we live in a time of extreme, let's see what we got here, here we go, of extreme advances in science. So you can have in your audience companion diagnostic companies and genetic sequencing companies, and we have incredible, powerful computational and scientific tools available to us now. And that's a good thing because we're facing a future with very complex problems that will require very complex solutions. So why is it, with all of these wonderful advances, that the public reacts often with more concern than enthusiasm to the news of the new genetic breakthroughs and the new boundaries that have been crossed? Why is it that 9 out of 10 scientists believe that genetically modified foods are safe to eat, whereas nearly 70% of the American public believes, with the same facts at hand, that they are unsafe to eat? Well, this is what I call the science-public interface, and it's very fraught right now with controversy. And the scientists will tell you that what you need, all of you, is more education. You need more information. And as soon as we give you more information and more education on these technical subjects, you will see the great benefit that is going to flow your way, and you'll accept it. But that is in fact not true, because we make all kinds of decisions, both accepting and rejecting things, without a tremendous amount of information at hand. And also, we found that you can take individuals who know nothing about genetic engineering and you can educate them. There have been some experiments in this in Canada and Denmark. And you can give them a lot of information, and they may become more accepting about certain applications in genetic engineering, but they become significantly more cautious in other applications of genetic engineering. So education and information is really not the problem, although clearly we do need to increase our knowledge about science as a nation. So what's going on here? Well, what's going on is that biotechnology blurs and breaks the categories with which we understand the world. So we as individuals, as we grow, learn our place in the world and how to relate to the things in it by being able to create categories. And when you're little, you create all kinds of them so that you know what something is, you know how you relate to it, and you know the rules that apply to it. And as we get older, our categories are already formed, and it's harder to break them and to blur them, because that's how we understand our world. Let me give you an example. So let's think of, it's a non-biotechnological example. Let's think about the categories that we have for gender, male and female, and we consider those very watertight. And we are learning today that this is not perhaps the way the world is. Perhaps there are, in fact, blurring and breakings of those two completely watertight categories that we thought when we look at transgender individuals, individuals who are phenotypically or genetically one gender, but gender identify as the other gender. This is really difficult for us, right? This is really difficult for societies and for people to change these watertight categories that we have. Well, science and biotechnology pushes on these all the time. So we used to think that there was one way to make a baby. Well, there isn't. You all know what that way is. And most of you were probably created that way, but not all of you. And in fact, in 1978, Louise Brown was the first in vitro fertilized baby. We called her a test tube baby. She was created in the UK. And she was front page news, and she was called the super babe, right? And we had discussions about whether that was in fact some kind of morally relevant thing to be created in a petri dish rather than created in the human body. It's amazing to us now that we had those conversations because all kinds of people undergo in vitro fertilization, and there are probably people here who were created through in vitro fertilization, and you will never know. This also raises questions, though, about what it means to have embryos outside the human body. Because all of our categories that we create rules around them too. So what does it mean to have embryos outside the human body? Are they people or are they other than people? And in the law, this always astounds people. Lawyers know this, that we have two categories to put everything that exists in the world into. Just two. All the riches of the world. People and property. So what happens when you have embryos outside the body? You have one of two choices. They're either people or they're property. And we know that people and property are watertight categories that can't be blurred through our experiences. We know that that leads to no good. And so what do? Do we create new categories? Sofia Vergara is in the news these days, fighting with her ex-fiance about what to do with their embryos, their in vitro fertilized frozen embryos. And this is only covered by contract law because we don't have a category for these things. This is complex ground. Biotechnology helps us create families. It creates families that look like this. It creates families that look like this. And it creates families that look like this. The picture on the top right is a lesbian couple, and that child can have 3 parents under the law. 11 states allow the sperm donor and the lesbian partner and the birth mother to have legal rights, 3 legal parents. The bottom picture is a surrogate mother, also not covered under most of our legal schemes except through contract. So these are not only social arrangements that are being pushed on, so the biological and social. This is a complicated area. It has values involved in it as well. Okay, so beyond dealing with the blurring and the breaking of the categories, we also have issues of value that come up. So if we are told that who we are is just the compilation of our genes, that raises very deep questions for us about the worth we have as human beings. So when they find a gene that points towards risk-taking behavior, another gene that points towards aggressive behavior, does that lead us down a road of genetic reductionism so that we are no longer individuals under God's plan, if you believe in God? We're no longer creatures of free will. We're just the compilation of all of our genes. That's really deeply unsettling for people. And it raises questions and concerns also about playing God, changing our relationships between being created and creator. And if we step into the role as creator, do we have actually the virtues that's necessary to play that role as we manipulate higher life forms? And should we be playing at that at all? And of course, a big part of science is play. It's necessary to play for good science, to learn new things. So this is part of the concern that you see brought up, is the undermining of our values and our relationships as well. This is especially so when you talk about crossing the species barrier. And I hope you've all eaten, so you're well digested. So when you talk about creating unnatural things, this is a glowing monkey and a glowing cat, and there's a mouse at the bottom we'll talk about later. We're going to talk about all of these images later. When you cross over some of the species barriers and you do things in species that can't be done in nature, this raises some really significant questions for people. And they tend to react emotionally first. We know this neurologically, that people react emotionally first. So when you hear about goats that have been genetically altered with a spider gene so that they produce spider silk proteins in their milk, you may, in fact, have this reaction. So the important point for you is that whatever message comes out first, people are absorbing it quickly and having an emotional reaction, not a rational reaction first. That's just neurologically not what happens. This we call the yuck factor in science. But people have talked about whether it's in fact meaningful or this is not real. It's not real. Or do we need to unpack it and see if there's something that's actually there? This is what the goats look like. But we need to understand, first of all, whether that feeling of repugnance is pointing us towards something that's morally worth paying attention to, something that's value-driven, or whether it's pointing us in an area that's not morally valuable. So, for example, historically, issues about interracial marriage would have raised kind of a yuck reaction in society. And we know that comes from a place of prejudice, not from a place of moral values worth paying attention to. So there's a lot of controversy over whether there is a wisdom in our repugnance or whether, in fact, we need to take our initial reactions and unpack them further to see what's pushing us to feel a certain way. Part of what shapes the emotional reaction is the frame in which it's placed. I want to talk a little bit about agricultural biotechnology. Frames are created. We create the frames through communication, and the media creates the frames of communication. Frames are a way of taking complex issues and embedding them in a context by emphasizing certain elements of them so you can understand them, so they resonate with core values. So, for example, proponents of stem cell research were able to switch the frame from the moral status of the embryo and switch it to a frame of scientific progress and comparative competitiveness. And when they were able to switch that frame, they were able to get the proposition in California passed to be able to do a lot of stem cell research in California. Climate change deniers have been very successful in switching the frame from some kind of long-term potential risk to one of scientific uncertainty and undue burdens. So if you can manipulate the frame, you can get your message across to resonate with certain values. And this is what happened to Monsanto. I don't know if you can read these slides, but the bottom slide says, GMOs aren't meant to feed the world. They're designed to sell Monsanto's herbicide Roundup Ready, right? They're a Roundup Ready herbicide. So Monsanto tried to brand what they were doing as feeding the world by creating agricultural biotechnology, by creating BT corn and some of their genetically modified crops. At the same time, they had very aggressive policies about not allowing farmers to replant their seeds, which is part of the agrarian tradition to save and replant their seeds. And so their message was not actually matched with their actions, and very easily picked up this negative part, which was that this is about big business. And that's, of course, a real challenge for business, this sense of distrust, that your motives are actually not what you say that they are. So here we can see, seeds belong to nature, not Monsanto. It became about ownership, corporate ownership of the food supply. It was a tremendous, tremendous communication failure. And the frame that was picked up in the media was one of Frankenfoods. I'm sure you've all heard that, Frankenfoods. It's a frame that's now impossible to change. It's extremely difficult to flip a frame around once it's grabbed hold of the public. So the framing, both by the media and through your communications, is exceedingly important. This is the Frankenfoods. Okay. What then do you do? So you follow up your emotions, the emotional reaction and the framing with facts. And you try and convince people that what you're doing is important by throwing facts at them. And we do this in science. In facts in science, we lead with the facts. But what we've discovered is people, as rational as we seem, are not that rational. We actually do what's called motivated reasoning. We do this neurologically. We take in facts and screen them. And we screen them through our value predispositions. So yet again, values raised to the top. It's our value predispositions that we use to screen all the facts you're giving us. Our historical experiences, whether we are African American and are familiar with the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, which had about 400 men, there were 600 men, 400 of whom had syphilis and thought they were getting treatment for 40 years. They were actually just being studied as research subjects to see the progression of the disease. So they passed syphilis to their wives and to their children before this experiment, that was here, before this experiment was whistleblown. So if that's the value and historical experience that you bring, you're not going to be particularly ready and willing to partake in scientific experimentation, nor that willing to go to the doctor. So our historical perspectives, our cultural values, our national temperaments. Americans tend to want life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Canadians are really skeptical about unfettered individualism, and our Constitution says peace, order, and good government. That's a national temperament difference. We walk among you, we look like you. But we're very different in these really small cultural ways. Also our ethical perspectives. Are we consequentialists? Do we really look at the bottom line, the consequences of our actions? Or are we people who more appeal to a virtue ethics type of ethical perspective? It's really important that I do the right thing and I model myself on people of high ethics like Dr. King and Gandhi, those sorts of ethical perspectives. And the last one I have on the screen down there is ideological tribe. And I mention that because that's one of the biggest dangers that we're facing in science communication today. And that is, I belong to a group of people, we're politically alike, we're ideologically alike. So I believe in these cluster of scientific facts. Or I believe in this other cluster because that's what my tribe believes. I don't take in the information and try and put it through my own filters and figure it out. I am a liberal Democrat, and so I believe in climate change, and I am skeptical of vaccines, or I am a conservative Republican, and that means I'm a climate change denier, and I am, so this stereotypical here, but this is a tribalism that is grabbing hold of scientific knowledge and deciding which facts belong to each tribe, and that's incredibly dangerous for us. So we're going to play a game. So what do you do? First of all, before we play our game, what do you do? Here's the most important thing. You have to listen. to what the values are that people are using to screen your information. You have to listen first, foremost. The other thing is you lead with your values. People tend to want to lead with the facts because they're neutral and they're objective and they create distance between us as people. They're a barrier. But in fact, you lead with your values. It's incredibly important for people to understand why you're doing what you're doing. What problem are you solving? And if there's some utility to it, then people are much more likely to continue to listen to your message. It's useful, it's a problem that I'm willing to listen to, it's a problem that resonates with my values, I understand what's motivated you to do this work. Now I will listen to you as you go through the facts. So first of all, you have to explain those motivations and facts. And so we will talk about motivations and utility after we play this game. So what I want you to do as I show you these pictures is I want you to just take note of the feelings that you have, okay? Just the feelings and maybe the questions that they raise. And then we're going to go back through them and I'm going to tell you about them and you're going to see whether your feelings change about them as I explain to you a little bit behind these images, okay? So this is the glowing rhesus monkey and glowing marmosets created in Japan. And they have a jellyfish protein, a protein from a jellyfish, peptide called green fluorescent protein, GFP, that has been put into them. They were embryos created with that protein, and now they fluoresce under black light. Okay? And this is the same for the cats. The cats have the same GFP, and they also fluoresce under black light. And this is a rabbit. Her name is Alba, and she fluoresces under black light as well. She's white otherwise, not green. And this is my favorite. This is a mouse. This is the Vacanti mouse. And this mouse has an ear on its back. Okay, so let's go back and let me tell you about why this was done. Okay, so I'll lead with the value here. Human health. This was done to further human health and to fight human disease. And to fight a disease that's decimating countries in Africa and affecting communities all over the world. Human HIV, AIDS. Because it turns out that monkeys and cats have a type of immune deficiency virus. FIV, feline immune deficiency virus for cats. And they have these things called restriction properties. And the restriction properties fight these HIV type diseases, but not in their own species. So the scientists said, what we need to do is we need to create these animal models and take the restriction proteins from the monkey and put them into the cat and see if that restriction property fights feline HIV. And guess what? It does. And in order to see that it does, we have to make them glowing because we can't see what's happening, where they're going, the interactions that are happening in the actual animal if they don't fluoresce. So we need this as a tool to be able to see what's happening. And we can then take that research, which is successful in animals, and maybe we can fight AIDS and HIV in humans. And this is what they hope to do. So with that information on board, do you feel differently a little bit about the glowing cats and the glowing monkeys? Does it feel like maybe that was a worthwhile thing to do? You might still have concerns about the cats and the monkeys, but now you understand it. Let's go a little further. Let's talk about Alba. She's different. Alba, same proteins, but she was created for a different purpose. She was created by an artist whose name is Ricardo Ash as art. She was created to be provocative as a piece of art. That was the motivation for creating this rabbit. Do you feel differently about the rabbit? That motivation matters. doesn't it? Tremendously. We definitely think that art has its place in society. Do we feel comfortable with manipulating life forms as art? Not all of us do. We might feel very differently about her if she was an animal model being used to combat human disease. Now let's talk about the mouse. So the mouse is a bit of a trick because the mouse is not actually genetically engineered at all. But on the internet, if you look up the mouse, up pops genetic engineering. She's not genetically engineered, he's not genetically engineered. And why would we grow an ear out of the back of the mouse? A lot of people, this makes people, their feelings very, very uncomfortable. So that's good that you all finished breakfast. So this is in fact an immune suppressed line of mice. So in other words, this is a natural mouse that is immunosuppressed. They didn't do anything to them, they just selected for this trait in the mice. And she's immune suppressed so that she won't reject the tissue that's on her back. The tissue is actually not human tissue. It's a scaffold, a biodegradable scaffold that's been seeded with cow cells, bovine cells, to grow this ear. And then it needs to be on the mouse so that it's perfused with blood, so that it's living tissue. Why? Still the why. Here's the why. The motivation for this was so people who are horrifically burned and they can't grow tissue that's only cartilage, like ears and nose, to make them more recognizable as human so they don't have to walk down the street and have children shrink from them. They have worked very hard to create replacement tissues for them so that they can be grafted on. And this was one of those experiments that they did, and it was successful. And now they can do this. And they no longer actually need mice. The recent development is they can do this in the Petri dishes with different kinds of scaffolds. So that's the motivation for the mouse. Do you feel differently about the mouse experiment now? So you can see the power of leading first with your values. I do a lot of work with genetically modified trees. So if you think genetically modified crops are fraught, try telling people you're going to modify their iconic tree. And so when I communicate about genetically modified trees, I start out by saying, we are facing a global forest crisis. This is true. There's my problem that we need to solve. We have forest species dying. There is no more American chestnut tree. It does not exist. The chestnut trees that you see are Chinese chestnut trees. And the American chestnut tree used to be iconic in this country. We are facing massive blights and massive infestation of non-native insects that are devastating entire swaths of forest, and with them, biodiversity, ecosystems, animal habitats are dying. This is true. And so we need to have at our disposal all the tools we can, only one of which is genetic engineering, to try and engineer some kind of resistance to these blights to save our forests and our ecosystems for the benefit of our generations, for our environment. Okay, so there is my appeal to values first. I tell you why we do what we do. We can disagree about the facts later, but I'm going to lead with the utility of what I'm doing so that you can see what I believe in. Finally, this is really important. If we don't have this opportunity to speak face to face, you are going to relate to me as you see my archetype, my stereotype. The stereotype of the mad scientist if you're a science. The stereotype of the corporate bigwig if you're a for-profit business person. Somebody who doesn't care about the world, only cares about money. Somebody who lives in a lab and doesn't have any care for what they're doing to the world. So the other part that's massively important in accomplishing your mission and in getting your communication across is in developing relationships. You have to develop trust with the people who are going to receive your message. because if they're going to actually accept what you're saying, they're going to be the people to adopt the risks and the uncertainties that you bring as well. So you need to be able to meet them and to show them and communicate with them that they have more in common with you. You share values. You have more in common than you have in difference. And so these are the people, the scientists, right? Some of these are my friends. I was saying last night, I'd like to say that Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of my friends, but he's not. I'd like to have dinner with him. They're real people. They're real people with values and with children and spouses and partners and dogs and cats and fears and loves. And so are all of you. And so we know that you already have the tools at hand to cross over the communication divide. You already have those tools at hand. You know people are going to react emotionally first, so you're going to lead with your values. You're going to put your mission out there first, your motivations. Then you're going to follow up with your facts, and then you're going to establish your relationships. Create your relationships, build that trust, which takes time. And so if you're in a business where you have people who go out and react with the public, you need to build time into that, into their jobs as well. They need time to listen, and they need time to communicate. So with all those tools in hand, you can accomplish your individual and your business missions, the missions of all of your professional and individual lives as well. Thank you.